Here we are live in the Meaningful Ideas Trading Club. And we're just getting rolling here. I'm Kyle Kaufman. I'm your host, and lucky and grateful to be joined today by Jen Gollnick. And Jen is going to bring it home today and talk to us about what she's doing with Data Informed Financial Services LLC. That's the business she owns and operates and how she helps people. We're going to get into a great discussion on that today. Again, just getting things rolling here. We should be live on Facebook. I'm going to make Patrice my co-host, and we're going to get into a great discussion. Before we do that, guys, just remember, feel free to be open-minded here. Hop in and out of the call. Keep your camera on, your mic on. Feel free to jump into the conversation in the chat. Raise your hand. We'll get you in and get your questions answered if you have them to the best of our ability. Be vulnerable in here, guys. It's a place to learn, share ideas, help each other at the end of the day, and overall just increase the capacity of our communities. What else? What am I missing here? Our three rules, Jen, is stolen from Tony Robbins, but makes sense to me. Number one, remember that there is a treasure out there. Number two, keep faith, you'll find it. And three, when you do, it'll be worth it. So keep heading towards that North Star. Welcome in. Anyone have any quick wins before we get rolling today? Let's go around the horn. Anyone want to report on some big news? I've got some big news here, and it kind of dovetails into our conversation with Jen. So, Jen, I just had somebody here at the office, and he said, well, who's coming on today? And I said, it's Jen Gollnick, and she's our fractional CFO, and she's been helping us. And she's helped us bring aboard now an accountant who's going to be essentially in-house here at HKK helping us. And this person said, well, what do they do? And I thought, well, that's a great question for Jen. So, I described it as, wanting to, basically have somebody come in, talk to us about our data, help us make better decisions. But I think you can say it much better than I can. So let's just start there if you could, and then I'll come back and we'll introduce you a little bit. So tell us how you're helping HKK. Let's get started there.
Sure. One of the key pieces, the most important aspects of data is that anything that is measured and watched is improved, right? And that is straight out of Gino Wickman's book, Traction, Chapter 5, which is the data component. So I know you're really big on EOS. You run EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System in your firm.
Yes.
Data is a really big component of that. And that is, you want to make sure that you are recording all of your transactions, you're recording all of your transactions accurately and appropriately. You're safeguarding your data, you're ensuring compliance with the various laws and ethical considerations that should be taken into account when dealing with data. There's many different types of data. You have personal data, you have business data, you have government data, which is kind of public data, invisible data, visible data. There's a lot of stuff out there. And sometimes knowing how to get to that information and look at it can help inform decisions that you make. It can help when you're setting a budget. It's hard to set a budget without either knowing where you want to go, the plans that you have, or knowing what's occurred in the past, the trends that have occurred. So typically, if I'm working on a budget for a company, I'm going to start with 3 years of historical data and trend that out and say, okay, this is where you could expect to be next year if you follow your trends. So then you take that information, you say, what's changed? You assess the background information, the data, to make sure that it's actually accurately recorded, because garbage in, garbage out. If you have a lot of miscoded transactions, then the budget that you create out of that is going to include funds in appropriate accounts instead of where they actually belong. So, you can look at that and then add in your goals, your hopes and dreams for the future. If you're planning on expanding, if you're planning on adding staff, adding locations, then you can put all of those assumptions there, record them. And when you look back on your budget to actual, you can look at the assumptions that you made and determine whether or not the results of your budget were in line with what you expected. And if they weren't, were your assumptions accurate or inaccurate, and in what way? And then every time you do that process, it allows you to get better at doing it the next time. So you can say, hey, we learned a lot last time around. We threw a bunch of funds in this account, and then we realized that we had this one vendor that we were going to be getting rid of that was 90% of that account. We didn't need it there. We knew we were getting rid of the vendor. Why did we include it? Something along those lines. That's an example, not a real life. So that's one way that you can use data to assist a business. Another way is decision making. Where is your revenue? Is it is all of are your customers coming from this county or that county? If you're trying to decide on whether you want to open or close a location, for example, knowing where your current client base is coming from can help you decide whether or not it makes sense to make that move.
This all to me, Jen, reminds me of the book Moneyball and the movie then that came out of that, and how a lot of sports teams transitioned from kind of the eye test to the analytics, right? And making these informed decisions based on how well an athlete might perform, given kind of measuring backwards, right, to project moving forward. And traditionally in sports, it was an eye test. That person looks like an athlete. And let's put this person in the lineup, so to speak, and see how they do, and kind of hold out trust and faith that that's going to win the day. And a lot of these teams started hiring these analytics teams to come in and, as you said, use the data to learn, right? And where do we put our resources, and how did that impact us? And then how do we get the best bang for our buck, right? Like, and just when you do that, an organization comes in. So first off, Jen, let's back up, and I'll come back to my question here. I want to show everyone where they can find you at your website here. So here it is, dataifs.com, dataifs.com. And guys, I highly recommend at least connecting with Jen. She is a connector. If she can't help your business, or it's not the right fit for whatever reason, she certainly has the connections, the knowledge, the know-how to help you in your business. I'll come back and we'll do some more screen sharing and throughout the conversation, Jen. But so when you have all this data, all this decision making, how did where did that desire for you come from? I want to talk about you as a person a little bit, and your military background, and when did this come to you that you just felt like you wanted to be of service to other entrepreneurs and business owners, and doing that with data in mind?
So I've always been very tenacious, really wanting to solve problems and make people's lives better, wherever they can be. If that's, helping to educate somebody so that they understand something that they didn't before, or whether it's physically helping them with something, or um, uh, along those lines, as I entered the accounting profession, within my career, I was working with small businesses, and then bigger businesses, and then a very large nonprofit. And um, there was a common thread throughout it that I could be helping more if I just did what I was doing a little bit more efficiently. And
Mm,
that was,
okay.
a big throwback to basic training when you are taught work smarter, not harder.
Work smarter, not harder. We've all heard
Yes,
that before.
yes, and use your tools and use the right tool for the job. So, my my drill sergeant was a very entertaining fellow.
Okay.
Um, we were told that the right utensil for any meal was a spoon, and that was the only utensil we were allowed to use our entire time in basic training. Whether those utensils, forks, or knives were provided with our meals or not, we were only allowed to use a spoon. Um,
Really? Okay.
correct.
Go more into that. So tell us, so
Well,
you did that then. You used the spoon. What
yeah,
did you
you used a
discover?
spoon, and it just, you part of that was because I was the squad leader in my platoon,
Hmm.
and so as squad leader, I was at the end of the line for meals, and when the last person sat down, you had 2 minutes to eat. And so the spoon is the right tool for the job because you needed it to be a shovel. And a knife is not a shovel, and a fork is not a shovel, but a spoon can be a shovel. And a spoon can also help you dig a hole in the middle of nowhere if you needed to dig a hole in the middle of nowhere. So if you had to pick one utensil to use, a spoon might be the right one.
Hmm.
Um, Assuming that you're not intending that utensil to be a weapon. Um,
So
but
did you think that going into basic training that that's one of the lessons you would learn?
no,
Okay.
no,
Eh,
certainly not. I expected it would be very physically challenging, and it
mhm.
absolutely was. And I
Right.
expected a lot of the emotional um, challenges that they
Right.
are intended to throw at you during that period, and that was certainly the case as well. But they had one of my absolute favorite part was the confidence courses where I'm climbing up these multi-story towers and climbing across the ropes to the other side or rappelling down Victory Tower at Fort Jackson. Like those were moments that really helped shape my confidence in myself and my confidence in my team. And that piece is key as well. You need to surround yourself with the right people, the right team, and have the right people in the right seat, which is another
Okay.
EOS concept.
Right.
And that's
So
where fractional controllership comes in, or
but
fractional CFOs, fractional leaders, chief operators, process improvement teams, people who know what they're doing, who can come in and do what they do best.
I want to go back. I got a couple things. I want to go back to the spoon. Okay. I really do. Because I just want to get into your mind a little bit. So again, you think a lot of these things about basic training, you get into it, and now here you are learning about like having to, was that a challenge? Did the drill sergeant say, guys, which one would you pick? A fork, a knife, or a spoon? Was that just told to you? How did that come about first off?
I was 17, and a lot of that time is kind of a blur. I don't
Yeah.
really recall.
Yeah.
I just remember it striking me as like all like this is more odd than I expected.
Right. Well,
And
and I
it was
wanted to get to that
our
point
platoon.
anyways.
It was
Yeah.
only our platoon that had to do this. So
And I wanted to get to that point anyways. So now here you are and you're 17 and you're told, pick the spoon, pick the spoon, pick the spoon. And like, how did you process that? What did it mean to you at that time? Like, how did that change your brain?
well, so it did get me thinking very much so about the right tool for the job.
Hmm.
In a way that I hadn't before. It, I mowed lawns and know the difference between a push mower and a self-propelled mower and a
Hmm.
riding mower, right? If you had to, 2 acres to mow, which of those would you choose? The riding
But
mower.
yeah.
Absolutely. because you don't want to have to use your own force to push a push mower. You don't want to walk the whole way behind a self-propelled mower when you could be riding, listening to your jams.
Yeah, right. Now, it might be different in basic. Did you have anyone that was training with you though that refused the spoon or like tried to challenge this concept of the spoon?
No, those people, that's some people self-select out of the military as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you you're always told to pick your battles. In some cases, you don't have a choice. Your battles are told to you in that context. But there's no at 17, I understood the drill sergeants were the position of authority. I needed
Mm-hmm.
to stay in their good graces if I wanted to maintain the schedule of getting home when I wanted to get home, because they could have very easily rolled and had rolled soldiers to prior, like to different units to start
Sure.
over if they hadn't cleared the red phase um
Right.
properly.
So,
So there's
okay.
a red, white, and a blue phase, and you get different privileges at different phases. And so you have the phase where they break you down, and then the phase where they're building you back up, and then the phase
Mm-hmm.
where they're really teaching you to be a leader and a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
um and and that I think was really important too, because you know you're invulnerable, you're immortal when you're that age. and
Sure.
and they're they're very clear about the chain of command. There's who you are accountable to. Accountability charts are important. We had to learn the chain of command from up our squad leader, our platoon leader, drill sergeants, all of them, all the way up to
Right.
the
Right.
president of the United States at the time. And we had to be able to name who was in our direct chain of command, because that mattered.
And then these are some of the points I think are interesting to talk about. You didn't have a choice to use anything other than the spoon, right? I mean, you were told that and given that direction. So as a young person coming in, if I said it this way, didn't know anything, just like, hey, I'm ready to commit. Is that direction at that time? If you take us back to that, and then, maybe we can talk about it in the world and in business. Is that direction, was that beneficial to you to have that direction, that chain of command?
Well, absolutely. I think it's important for everybody to understand who who their leaders are,
Hmm.
understand who their resources are, um, understand that there is structure and that structure is important. And yeah, I see in the chat structure and discipline, and that's exactly what it is. So when I was young, I was given an analogy at one point about these kids that were playing on a playground, and the playground was surrounded by a fence. And the kids were always climbing on the fence and getting yelled at to get off the fence, get off the fence. And the parents had a meeting and they said, well, obviously this fence is a problem. We need to take the fence away. So they took the fence away, and then the kids started just hanging out in the middle and not really playing. And what the lesson in that was the kids liked knowing where the boundaries were. They liked to challenge those boundaries and play with those boundaries, but they were respecting the boundaries. They stayed on the right side of the fence at all times. And having that boundary also gave them a sense of freedom, because they knew how far they were empowered to go. They knew what line was okay to cross, and
Right.
where they had a clear delineation that no, at this point, if I need to pass that, I need to be with an adult. And I think the same can be true in business as well.
Oh,
It's
have you seen that in some of these businesses that you've gone into where some have the boundaries, they have the chain of command, so to speak, they have the direction, people know their resources versus others where they're lost?
Yes, I think
Okay.
I think it's clear not only so when there's a clear structure, there's often it is accompanied by clear goals, a
Okay.
clear mission, a clear vision. And when your staff knows the direction that you're trying to go,
Hmm.
they can be on board with helping you get there in a way that is much more effective than if they're just like, well, I know I'm going to come in and do my job. I don't know what the end goal of that job is, but you know what? It's fine. I don't know what metrics I'm trying to meet, but that's fine too. I'll just do what I can. It's
Hmm.
fine.
Right.
But then, like I said, anything that's measured and watched is improved. So if everybody has a number, if everybody has something that they're working towards, if everybody has a goal of their own, something that they know other people are paying attention to, they're going to start paying more attention to that number as well, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean, the military probably has the clearest goals, right? Like people know that. Is that fair to say? I mean, you knew what you're getting into there. Is that fair to say?
uh, yeah, yes and no.
Uh-huh.
I think, there's there's certainly some overconfidence I likely had going in there about my ability to interact with um I learned a lot about myself in that time about who I was, um about what I was willing to stand up for, about who I wanted to surround myself with, about how what I had been taught rather, um was not was very narrow, and I was exposed to a much broader world than the little town of less than 2,500 I grew up in.
Mm,
And that was an enormously powerful growth period for me
sure.
because it's so important when you're having a discussion that you have that everybody has a seat at the table, that their voice is heard in some way. Um, and and my life prior to that had been very limited in the number of voices that I was hearing and
Okay.
exposure that I had.
Sure.
And then coming back from that and going to college really expanded my understanding of how to interact with others and um how to stand up for myself, how to stand up for others, how to speak bluntly when bluntness was needed, and how to be diplomatic when diplomacy was needed, and how to blend the two so that you could be both very clear in what you're saying, but say it diplomatically. And one of the best ways to do that is, if you have examples to show, if you have data to back up what you're saying,
Mm, hmm.
then you can say what you're saying with more confidence. And um, if you're showing examples, you need to hope that you're representing those examples accurately.
It's very similar in the law, right? In some sense, the family law work that we do, lots of people like to tell us stories, tell us what's going on, their experience. And if we get into a courtroom and you hear that phrase, it's a classic he said, she said, which generally then just comes down to credibility, based upon what a person is stating to a court. And so we always tell our clients, as you're saying, what do you have to back this up? What's the evidence? What are the third party sources? Are there other witnesses? Are there reports, data, pictures, videos, recordings, any of that stuff? And that's a little bit what you're saying too. That people have concepts and ideas of how to maybe run business or make decisions, but if they've got that data behind it, It's just what you have a lot more confidence doing it, number one. I'm sorry that we got bogged down necessarily on the military. I don't know if we did. It's fascinating to me, a person who was not in the military. And number one, thank you for everything you did and putting in your time and serving. And how long were you in the military?
About 3.5 years.
3.5 years. And
Yeah.
it
And I
just,
drove, I drove tank, the trucks that hauled tanks. Those trucks were built here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm going to do a shout out for them.
yeah, it's and you talked about a seat at the table, and so from an outsider, looking into a person who has a military experience, my perspective is that you probably don't have a seat at the table, but I don't know if that's true. And it's a perception of like you go in and it is very rigid, and you're told and you follow direction, and I can't imagine that that's entirely true because we're people and humans, and things evolve and transform because we're humans, right? And we have ideas and concepts and ways. So how, if you could just tell us that in a highly structured organization like that, right? And you come in and you're a basic, and if you see something that isn't right or needs improvement, what happens? Does that idea die? Does it go up the chain of command? And is it welcomed? Or when you said, hey, actually, I think that you didn't say this, I know. The fork is better than the spoon. I want to tell you why. Do you even get a say in that? I'm just curious.
So I think it depends on the strength of your leaders first and foremost, and your own confidence, your own ability to speak up. Um, you know, I would say in some cases you absolutely don't get a choice, but in other things, maybe there's a little bit more wiggle room with it.
Hmm.
Maybe your leaders can advocate on your behalf. So,
Hmm.
when we were activated, we we went to some barracks that did not have hot water. Um,
Mm.
and we were there in winter. It was tons of fun and very cold.
Wow.
And, we knew that from the beginning, our leaders were advocating up the chain of command to try to get us better barracks. And, it didn't happen immediately. It was, months into it, but we knew that they were at least trying, and we had to be trusting that our leaders had our back. And I think the same is true in many organizations. I just sat at a staff meeting on Monday with one group, and they're trying a new incentive plan with their team. And somebody had asked a question essentially saying, well, does that mean that we're going to be losing this other benefit? And the response was, we don't know yet. We need to see how this all plans out and whether we think that it is fairly compensating our team in the way that we intended it to. And if it did not, we will reassess. And right now, next year is a long way away, and we would ask you to trust us
Hmm.
to have your best interests in mind, and trust that we're not going to try to take advantage of you. And because they have a very open, honest, transparent culture in place, they can say that, and it is likely that the staff will will um, trust them at their word, because they will have had that past history to back them up. They'll have known, well, they've paid me fairly up to date. Why would they stop now? Um, and so I think it's really um in any organization, be it the military or a business or a family, the the strength of that organization lies with the people within it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the culture really starts with tone at the top, and that goes down. But it's also really important to be aware of what the culture is at every level, because you could have a tone at the top all you want, but if it's not actually trickling down, or if your team isn't buying into it, or they don't believe you, um then that's not actually the culture of your organization you just think it is.
Hmm.
And so knowing knowing what you think is the case and others' perception of reality um, can be helpful as well.
Right. I want to pause and ask you about leaders. One of my questions for you is you talked about strength of leaders. I want to know, as you formulate your thoughts here for a moment, what are some of those attributes? I watched the original Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio the other day, and I just love this moment in there. And I've told this story to some of the team members here at HKK, but so Daniel, right, the Karate Kid, he's having trouble with some of his schoolmates. They're beating him up and that sort of thing, and he's kind of bad mouthing them a little bit. And he's talking to his mentor, his leader, his teacher, Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi simply says to him, Daniel-san, there's no such thing as a bad student, only bad teacher. And it just hit me, it just like really hit me. And so much of that, right, comes from that what we learn from the people above us and then how we carry that out in the world. So tell me about some of the things that you like in leaders that you see, these companies that you've gone into, whether it's a military, private, um, it could have been in your experience in college. Who are some of the people that jump out to you? And what are some of the attributes? I'd just like to hear your perspective on that.
So the leaders who have always stood out in my mind are the ones who were champions on the behalf of the people they led. Um, Whether that meant marching alongside of them and giving them encouragement, um, or or showing them a better way to do a job they were doing, supporting them and giving them the skills, um, supporting them, supporting your staff while they're trying to, get an education so that they can leave your team, and supporting them anyway, knowing that. Um, those have always been, really important, but um the ones who have really stuck with me are the ones who were always honest with me. The ones who were willing and able to provide constructive criticism in a manner that was constructive,
Hmm. Right.
timely, and well intentioned. It, there's
I love
I
that. You have some good
had
ones there.
one store
Well-intentioned, timely.
manager when I worked at Walgreens. I had one store manager who was reassigned to another store, and on his last day, he called all of his managers into the office one by one, and he told them all of the things that had bothered him for the last X number of years he had worked with them.
Okay. All right.
So that was a fantastic exit interview with him. I loved that. Shortly thereafter, a few years thereafter, I moved to the store manager that sticks out to me as the one of the best leaders that I've worked with. Um, and she would pull me into the office and say, Jen, I heard that this happened. Tell me your side of it. And she would listen to my side of it. And then she would provide feedback on whether or not the way that I had handled the situation was in line with what she perceived might have been the best way to have done it.
Hmm.
And it was
That's
always
the seat at the
timely.
table.
It was always direct. She was not having that conversation with others behind my back. She was
Right.
bringing it straight to me. She was giving me an opportunity to improve myself by providing me feedback. Feedback is a gift. How you receive that gift and what you do with it speaks to your character. Um, Not all feedback is given to you in a way that is well done. Sometimes feedback sucks. Um, but that doesn't mean that you should not learn from it, that you shouldn't apply it to your everyday life, to the decisions that you make, or you can give it, weight as appropriate. Maybe some feedback you dismiss. Maybe not all of it is maybe something said in anger might not be um might not be a fair assessment of how that person feels all the time. So you shouldn't assume that something said in that in a highly emotional state is accurate to reality all of the time.
Wow, you're just dropping nuggets in here. I just like a lot of it. So that manager gave you the seat at the table, though, right? Gave you that opportunity
He
to say, "Hey,
did.
I heard this. Tell me your side of the story," right? You're
and
able to
and
get
she gave me
out.
the opportunity to grow as
Yeah,
a leader, as a
sure.
person, as a follower, and it was something that I I believe that she tended to try to do with everybody, but she really focused on those who were receptive to it. She was trying to be a mentor to everyone who wanted mentorship and wanted to grow as a person, but she was trying to be fair to the entire team and to the customers and to her managers, and balance all of that. And I think that she did a phenomenal job of doing that. Beth, if you hear this, thank you so much. You were an amazing leader.
Awesome. I love the shout out too. Uh, I think, Jen, I've kind of always struggled with the idea that leaders, because you're skilled at something, you're a leader, or because you do a lot of activities, you're a leader. There seems to be that kind of in like in at least education in America, right? Like as you come up and kids are getting ready for college or wanting to maybe go off, and everyone just starts joining activities, and then they're just kind of deemed like, hey, because you're involved, you're now a leader. I don't know. Are you a leader because you're involved? Do you have any opinions on that? And then what about from a skill set standpoint? Just from basic skill, whether you're a mathematician or a soccer star, does that make you a leader of the team because you're better at the skill?
I would say no. Uh, so you can have somebody be a very effective project manager who is not effective at um, programming computers, but they're working with a team of engineers who are amazing at programming computers, but they can't stay on a deadline by themselves to save their lives. And
Right,
so they need a project manager to keep them on track. That project manager has to be a good leader. They have to be good at determining who is the right person to do the job, who has the skill, who has the capacity, get it, want it, capacity to
right,
do it. That's
right,
another EOS concept. But but just because the engineer is fantastic at programming doesn't necessarily mean that they're fantastic at interacting with the clients, that they can encourage the rest of the team to get things done or hold the rest of the team accountable to
agreed.
standards.
Right,
And it's um also not something that appeals to everybody. Some people just really would love to stay individual contributors, and that is where their comfort zone is. That is where their strength lies. And others love supporting leaders.
right,
They love the thrill of following a leader with a vision that is bigger than themselves.
right. What's a oh man, I'm gonna forget the name of the book. I'll come back to it. It'll come to me here. Sorry, just too much swimming around in my head. But the E-Myth Revisited, or the E-Myth that I'm sure you guys some of you are familiar with this book. Um, but it's basically what you're talking about here, Jen. I'm just like, what do we do? It seems like that's all the small businesses, right? Like generally people start a small business because they're a technician and they are good at a skill, and then they're like, I'm going to do it my own way. And people essentially pay them because they're good at what they do, whether it's knowledge based or labor based, right? And then they get popular and they need to do it more. So then they start hiring people to help them do what they're really good at, right? And it just seems like so many businesses get started that way. And maybe that's just my narrow perspective, the reference points. Like you said, maybe I'm only living in a small town and I don't have enough reference points of other businesses. And I guess what I'm trying to say is how do we help people, maybe like me, get through that? Like when you start a business, doing it right off the bat versus finding yourself you started something you're really good at, but now like maybe you're not great at managing, you're not great at hiring, and now you start having all these headaches because things aren't getting done the way you want them to get done. So what would you say to that? And business owners and small business owners or people thinking about side hustles or going out on their own and how to get started with this and do it the right way.
So there's a lot to unpack in that. I have a few points I can throw out there. People get into business for a lot of different reasons. I was exposed to a few more in a book, Surrounded by Awesome Women by Sheila Long, where she talked about, there are a lot of women, especially, who get into business for very certain, specific reasons. Some of them feel like they're forced into it because of the work-life balance constraints. The pandemic was
Sure.
a huge
Yeah.
boom for
Yes.
women-owned businesses because they suddenly found themselves juggling, their kids working, going to school at home, and then,
Right.
the constraints changed, the market changed, and suddenly what they needed to do to take care of things changed. So that you have that. Um, you have people who get into it because, yeah, they fell into it. They realize, like, oh, this is what I'm good at and I love it and I want to do it full time. You have others who um they've been traumatized by a former employee, and they don't want to, um not employee, employer, and they are afraid to have another leader again. And in those cases, that there's there's they may not feel like they're in it by choice. They may feel like they're forced into the situation. And in those cases, more than any others, like people who are doing it because they're like, wow, this is exciting. I want to do this. I want to be a business person. I want to be an
Yeah.
entrepreneur.
Right.
I think that they feel more equipped to deal with it than people who feel like they've fallen into it. Or,
Yeah.
I just started taking pictures at my kids' school on the side, and then I was sharing those pictures, and then they started asking me to do these events, and then they started paying me for it. And now I
Right.
found myself in a business, and I didn't mean to. You know,
Right.
they need to have a different set of resources. And that's where, you surround yourself with people who have different strengths than you. You find your
Mm.
tribe,
Yeah.
you find the people who share um similar challenges that you do. And I went to I was somebody I forget his name right off the bat. I apologize, but somebody in a training had asked a question of me, and, well, of the group, but I internalized this question. And it was, when you're trying to figure out what to do, how do you go about trying to figure that out? And my immediate thought was, I'm gonna research it. I'm gonna look into it and see what resources I can find about it.
Sure.
And I didn't really think that was the wrong answer until he says that is wrong. And okay, why exactly is that wrong? And he said, you're trying to rewrite the wheel, or like rewrite
Reinvent the wheel.
reinvent the wheel. Yes, thank you. Somebody has already done that. Call somebody who's already done that and ask them. You had uh one of your MITCs here was take a rich person to lunch, right?
Yep.
And some of the
Mhm.
feedback that was shared in that was, you know, you you can ask other people for things. You can give back to other people. It's some things go full cycle. In some cases, you're paying it forward. In some cases, you're paying it back. But things tend to balance out in the end. There are people out there who really just love helping other people, who love being a resource to others. Um, and they, it really excites me when my clients have an aha moment, or something that they're changing a decision that they were going to make based on either feedback that I had provided, data that showed that perhaps a different path was a better path, or um like they've learned something new. Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And so when clients come to me, I'm not going to judge them for their present state or their past state.
Sure. Right.
I'm going to try to meet them where they are and say, hey, this is fantastic. You've got this great foundation in place, and here's where we can build on it.
Sure.
Here's where we can improve it. Here's where we can automate. Here's where
Yeah.
here's where we can use better tools. Um,
I'm
but
smiling because I feel like that's like some of our initial conversations, right? Like think we were doing things okay, and you came in and you're like, yeah, so we'll take it from here, and like really positive about it. And we've had I don't know how long have we been at this? A year?
well, so I came onto the leadership team in July of last year. So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
we're going on 8 months now, I think.
Right. And it's just continual improvement and getting clearer on things. So, it's like a checkup, right? Like, are people calling you, Jen, then when they're kind of at that point of like, hey, this is beyond my capacity now, or like my skill set is limited, right? Because there is a limitation with leaders. I think a good strength, a good attribute of a leader is that recognition of like, I have to get out of the way to allow other people to do what they do best. And a lot of businesses, I think, struggle because there's somebody there holding on to that vine who says, no, I know what's best and we're not going to do anything beyond that. Um, and that
So
can be scary for people within business to delegate that to someone else or hand it off.
I 100% agree, and I think that that is especially true if you know, if this company is something you view as your baby,
Right.
if it is, if this company is intended to be a retirement, it is hard to let go and trust somebody else. And so, um, the vast majority of my clients are referrals, or people who I have met before, who people who have attended presentations that I've done, or people um, who I heard that I helped this group on a project and they have a similar project. Um, a lot of the people who have reached out though, they're just looking at their financial statements and they're saying, I have a problem and I
Right.
don't know what the problem is and I have no idea how to solve it and I don't have the right skills for it. And they've ignored, or they've grown and they've scaled and they can't keep up anymore. Maybe it was all fine and good for them to keep up with their invoices and payment application and the deposits and tracking all of that and doing the reconciliations when they only had 20 transactions a month. But now
Sure.
they're at 2,000 transactions a month. They need to scale that. They need solutions that work with where they are now instead of where they were when they started.
Right.
And a lot of people have a misconception that it's all or none, um, with many resources. And I think that, the accountant shortage has been a blessing and a boon. I'm sorry, like it drawback and a blessing, because a drawback because there's there's not going to be enough people providing the services unless more people get into the field or we have better tools or learn to use our tools more effectively.
Right. Right.
Um, but it's also somewhat been a blessing because people are now much more open to fractional service, and that is allowing them to get the right level of service by the right person. And so, what that means is maybe you have a bookkeeper who is taking care of the ins and outs, the daily recording of things. Maybe you have an accountant who's reviewing that. Maybe you have a CFO a couple hours a week who is overseeing all of it and listening in and making sure you're remaining compliant. Do somebody comes to you, for example, and says, um, um, hey, I just bought a summer house over in Minnesota and I'm gonna be hanging out there for 3 months of the year, hope you don't mind. And you're like, yeah, I guess no problem. Most of the work you do is all online anyway, no big deal. And then suddenly you realize like, oh no, I got a letter from Minnesota. I was supposed to have opened up to do business in the state of Minnesota and filed unemployment in Minnesota
Mm,
and filed income tax withholding and a business tax registration and now income taxes. So now I need to redo my income tax return for last year because, yep, that started a year ago before they realized that they had revenue and it was caught because of the reporting at year end. You want to catch that before it happens, not after it happens,
Sure.
right?
Right. Right.
And so you want to have a resource on the team who is capable of letting you know where potential pitfalls are,
Yeah.
letting you know what
Right.
rules are in place, giving you um, giving you
Casual leads to
direction.
casualty, right? Casual leads to casualty. Having an eye on those things.
Yeah.
Quick pause. I had was displaying Steve Solano of EOS, and I did that because he was the connector that brought Jen and I together, and Jen to HKK, and networking um, is time consuming. Networking, open and honest, is time consuming. It requires a lot. Let's set up a meeting. Let's talk. What are we going to talk about? Some networking meetings are not productive. And it's interesting. Have you ever been in one of those where you kind of like have the conversation and then you realize there's a point where maybe there's not something there, at least not today. And, it's maybe down the road. And then there's other times when you get together with somebody, you can see the immediate benefit of it. And so when we've been working with Steve Solano, EOS implementer, anyone watching this, I encourage you to connect with him. He's a connector and also can help you with your business. But we came to him at some point and said, hey, look, Ryan Kautzer and myself, partners here, business owners, and we said, we're interested in these numbers. We want to get better with the data that we collect and how we use it and how we make decisions. And we tried to do that ourselves and, tried to make that work. But that's very difficult to do from a time capacity and skill capacity. And so Steve was able to connect us with Jen. And I just wanted to reinforce that idea of networking, and even the folks that come on here on MITC and use this network, please. And first thing I think, Jen, I said to you, I said, I just want you to come in and essentially kind of audit us. Like, I don't know, do we have the right software? Do we need new software? What do we need 10 years from now? Do we have the right, people in the seats, helping us with these financial determinations? Um, and from there, this is a program that I use. This is a software that I use. Here, I now have access to other people in this financial world that could be a benefit to you. It helps us. There's a book called The Speed of Trust, right? Where decisions are made much more quickly because you trust somebody. That's why we do business a lot of times with family members or friends. Um, and it's not to say the business could be good or bad, I don't know, but you would make the decision to do the business faster because you're familiar with that person and you trust that person. So you would get into business faster, for example, with a family member than you would with a stranger who's just outside walking around right now, right? You would take a much longer approach. But the point of it is if you get those people in your network that you do trust, and they've shown you that, and they've shown you their skill set and what they can do, it's so much easier to just stack on top of that at that point. When we have a financial issue now, I'm not going to Google necessarily. I might do some independent work on it, or Ryan might, but we're going to go to Jen. Jen, here's our issue. And then that takes us and it helps us connect all those dots. So I just wanted to point all that out and the power of that network. And then on this fractional end of it, I think that is a game changer for businesses. Because I was going to ask you about businesses and the fear of like, well, I don't know, we're not big enough, or we don't need this, or it's too expensive, right? And I'm just trying to make ends meet right now. How do I bring somebody else on? Um, so are you doing more fractional service than how would you describe kind of your role? If you could tell us how many businesses you think you're serving right now?
So I believe I'm probably the senior financial leader for 8 or 9 organizations now,
Mm, wow.
currently.
Do you
And
love that?
some of them I I may be touching base with them an hour a month because that's all they need because they've gotten
Mhm.
their process clean or because they're small. Where others it may be a few hours a week, depending on the needs and desires of the client. I think what's
Sure.
important is, um, my clients control the scope of my work. And so if they are asking me to do a project, then it's important that I can kind of estimate about what it would take to do that project, how long it's going to take to do it, so that I can, accurately help them understand whether that's within their budget. And if it's not, help them find a resource that is within their budget, whether it's somebody on my team or elsewhere. But I think what's more important is the question, can you afford not to? Um, is another piece of it.
Can you
So
afford not to? Yeah.
I'm doing a project right now where in the last two, so a lot of the vast majority of the people who come to me because there's a problem in their financial statements and they don't know what it is, or they know what it is, but they don't know why it is or how to fix it. And so, like one of the clients that I did some project work for recently, a lot of their transactions had been double entered, miscategorized,
Mm.
misapplied. And when all is said and done, the end result is, we're cutting their net income for the year in half over what they had estimated when they paid their taxes. Um, and the amounts that they reported for other reporting weren't accurate, and now we're going to be cleaning those up. Um, it is much more expensive to clean something up after the fact than it is to get it right the first time, or to clean it up when it's only a small project. So, if you realize something is not quite right or you've got a problem,
Right.
bringing somebody in to help you fix that while it's still a small problem is going to be far more affordable than after you've had deposits misapplied for 5 years. And that was one of the first projects that I had walked into was our AR is a hot mess. We have clients that are getting bills when they already paid, and you dig into it and you realize, well, the payment didn't apply to their invoice because their invoice was already marked partially as paid from this other payment because this other payment was misapplied. And it you know tracking that down to its source and realizing that initial error was 4 years old, and every single transaction after that
Mm.
had to be fixed.
Hmm.
That's a much bigger process and project, and much more expensive than having somebody come in and do your account reconciliation at the end of the month and say, hey, you realize that this one transaction you had entered, this is both a credit and a debit, and so you didn't actually charge the expense for this. You had an in and out on the same account. Let's get this fixed, and now your accounts are accurate. Right? Cleaning up a few transactions or catching it right away or just doing it right the first time is going to save you from a huge headache later. And you do not want to be the one to find the error. You don't want I'm sorry, you do want to be the one to know there's an error and find the error. You don't want it to be because you get a letter from the
Right.
Department of Revenue or the
Right.
IRS.
Right. So I know you like to talk about good versus bad data and how to find it or spot the difference between the two. Give us some of that. What is good data? What's bad data? And how do you spot it?
Well, so I mean, good bad data is a little bit easier to explain than good data.
Okay.
Um, it's easier to explain ways to safeguard and get to good data when you have an understanding of what bad data is.
Hmm.
And so if you talk about different types of bad data, you could have limited data. So you could be trying to do an annual budget, but you're only looking at January of the last 3 years, and you're trying to base your entire annual budget just on the transactions from a single month. That's limited data. That's garbage.
Got it.
Or what you're trying to do. You could have conflicting data. So this person says that person was wearing a green hat, and this person says that person was wearing a blue hat.
Right.
Now you have conflicting data. You either need to go to the source or visual evidence to see what that was, and even visual data, evidence, was that dress blue or gold? I think there's still conflict about that, right? Yeah, You have untested data. So have you validated that the data that is coming in is accurate? So this person had been doing their bank reconciliations, as soon as they learned that they should be doing bank reconciliations, but they didn't know what to look for. Um, and so for when I do a reconciliation, I pay the most attention to what has not cleared. That's how you find duplicate data. That's how you find data that's been coded to a wrong account, errors in that way. Um, but but untested data, she didn't know what she was looking for when she was doing the reconciliation. So she's just checking off, okay, these cleared. It reconciled the numbers fine. Um, so you know, not validating that the data that you are working with is solid data, that's another type of bad data. If it's mismatch. So if you don't have identifiers, if you don't have a client ID that is separate for each client, then every Susie Smith is the same Susie Smith.
And
So
again,
so that's bad. So you could have inaccurate or incorrect data. So a formula is wrong. A formula excludes a cell. Somebody transposed it when they were entering it. So it's a data entry error. A machine was calibrated wrong. So instead of measuring starting at 0 inches, it started measuring at 3 inches. And now everything it measured is off 3 inches. That's just inaccurate, bad data. If it's missing or incomplete, you're missing email addresses in a tenth of your CRM. That's bad data. If it's duplicated, that's bad. If it's inconsistent. So if you have different dates, so if you're looking for a file and one person names the file starting with the year and another person names it starting with the month, when you go to look for a file, you might say, oh, August is missing. And the other person's like, no, it's not. It's right up there. It's, August right up there. And I'm like, oh, I was looking under the year and then August. And, so that could be something. If it's slow, outdated, stale, if it's not current data, so historical trends help, but if you need to make a decision in real time about how much milk to order, knowing how much milk you had a month ago doesn't necessarily help you know how much you need to order today unless you have additional data to go with it. If it is irrelevant data. So it probably doesn't matter how many people on the call today are wearing hats or not wearing hats. It's irrelevant to how many people were on the call. If it's misformatted, if you have, in one case you're spelling Susie Susie, in another case Suzy, that can be one thing, or misformatted as in data type, like if you have CSV files that are intermixed with XLS files and now the software can't open them both. That's something. Bias data. If it's gonna skew the results because there is bias in the way that you gathered the data or the way that you're looking at it, or if it's intended to favorable a particular outcome, that's bad. If it's noisy, you can have a whole bunch of variability or random numbers and things,
sure.
and that can skew what you're looking at if you pay attention to that. And so sometimes if you get rid of outliers in your data, that may help you to make more solid decisions. And then yeah, so those are a lot of different types of bad data, and you can prevent a lot of those with automation, with going to the source, with validating sources, with, I love to say that one of the best defenses against bad data is a good reconciliation. And I, kind of referenced before, one of the things I look at, what's outstanding. But I'm also taking that opportunity to look at, were there any unusual transactions that occurred in that account during that period? Um,
Jen,
and
do you have some tried and true like data points that you think any business, doesn't matter what it is, maybe these 9 you're working for, doing business for, or coming into a new one, that you would just say like, I need to know where you're at on these 5 things. Like it doesn't matter your industry, or one or two. Are there just some like favorite data points that you like to immediately know about? Or maybe it's not exactly a number, or the things that you kind of like ask, right? To check in on the health, right, of this business. So before you see any numbers or get access to it, hey, I need to know this, 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 and this.
So first of all, I want to understand what their perception of their reality is. Um, so if somebody is coming to me and saying that they have a problem in their financial statements and they don't know what it is, I'm not going to say, great, that's fantastic. This is how I'll help you.
Mhm.
I want to know what they perceive that problem to be, why they think it's a problem, have they taken any steps to address it, what those steps have been, um, and and try to uh try to get some information from them regarding um what their perceived pain points actually are, because it does not help if I come in and I say, let me see your financial statements. Oh, hey, you've got problems in all these accounts. And they're like, okay, I don't actually care about the problems in those accounts. I had a fire over here and you didn't listen to me. And now that fire just took out 3 more houses because you didn't listen. So making sure that I'm on the same page regarding what next steps are is always really vital. And
For sure.
of course I want to take a look at the balance sheet. I want to take a look at the income statement, the statement of cash flow, and basic financial statements. But if you're on EOS, can I see your VTO, your vision traction organizer? Where are you hoping to be in 10 years, in 3 years, this year? Can I see your dashboard? What are you reporting on in your L10 meetings? What metrics are you looking at? And those are really good starting points for leading the conversation.
You guys, you can connect with Jen here, LinkedIn. Is that a good source for you, Jen, if people wanted to reach out to you?
Absolutely.
All right, we put that in the chat, linkedin.com/Jen Gollnick, I think is the shortened version of it. But yeah, so when looking, to where to find, you come into these companies, where do you go to? Where's the treasure trove of information? Is it the people? Do you go to the people first? Do you go to a spreadsheet? Do you go to the soft, what is it?
So it really depends on the scope of what I've been asked to do. Um, so so um I might be brought in to do a project, and during the scope of that limited project, I would point out things as I see them and provide guidance or recommendations. If something is outside of the scope of the engagement, I would bring it to the leaders and talk with them about that. But there's the general ledger really tells a story, and so I like looking at the general ledger on a transactional basis, but I'll also pay attention to balance sheets. Are they pointing in the right direction? Do you have a whole bunch sitting in a liability account that really that should have cleared by now and it shouldn't still be sitting as a liability? Do you have assets that aren't actually, undeposited funds that aren't really undeposited funds? Is it, do you have any accounts that have stayed the same amount for the last 3 years? Because maybe that account is not being used as it was intended to be used. Um, and maybe it needs to be cleaned up a little, things like that. But um, really, it's I can tell a lot when I get in and I look at a file structure, have things been saved properly? I can look in the general ledger to tell things, but none of that means anything without the people, because the people are going to tell you right away what their pain points are. I started an engagement once where I was told that my number one priority was going to be a certain project. And the first day that I started, out of the 15 employees I was introduced to, 5 of them told me that my first priority was going to be fixing their payroll system. And so my first priority changed because I was given feedback that this is truly the biggest pain point that is impacting the largest volume of people, and it's the easiest to fix. And then you can take the time to deal with this not quite so low hanging fruit that really impacts only one or two people. And my priorities shifted based on my interactions with the people and what they were experiencing in real time. Kyle, you're muted.
It's amazing that they, and give you that trust to go in and ask those questions and get to that point. Speaking of people, you gave me this gift here, Hardwiring Excellence. And you said that this book for you, and the author of this book is Quint Studer,
Yeah.
Studer. And you said that this is a game changer for you. And so this will be my next read that is paperback, if I called it that. What does that book, Hardwiring Excellence, mean for you? When did you read it, and what would you say is so fantastic about it?
So I read it when I was fairly new in my career at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And it is written from the perspective of a hospital executive who
Mm,
really did some soul searching and realized that he needed some stronger skills as a leader if he wanted his people to follow him and to get the results that he desired. And
wow.
it really started with recognizing that leadership is service. And it's expressing gratitude. It is, it is thanking people who are aligning with your culture publicly so that others can see that there is that culture matters to you, that it's important to you, and that there is
Right.
praise publicly offered when people align with it. And it also it talked about really the importance of accountability, holding people accountable, holding people to a high level of standards. Excellence begets excellence. And if you keep low performers on your team consistently, you're not going to bring that low performer up to a high performer without additional skills. What you're going to do is you're going to bring the high performers down.
Mhm.
And if they are looking around and saying, this, nobody cares what the end result of our work is or how well we do our job, that becomes the culture. But when you are establishing um, a culture of rewarding excellence, of rewarding good service, of listening to people's ideas and rewarding those good ideas, when you get a culture of your leaders saying thank you and stopping and asking their employees what their pain points are and how can I help you? How can I help you do your job better? What tools do you need to do your job? How can I help you, feel more safe? How can I help you with this or that? When you have those leaders, we're back to leadership again. Um, when you have those leaders that are really listening and really care about the answers of their employees, that's how you create um, a, a culture, a base of employees that want to follow you. And that's how you reach your goals faster because you have
I'm
alignment.
I'm even more excited to read this one. And I've never worked in the medical field. My wife has, and she's great and always, brings her perspective from kind of working in that medical field. And I like to watch how the medical field works, from essentially patient perspective and expectations, and like how, at least for the outside looking in, how things are kind of set up. And so I'm excited now to kind of get inside the walls of all of that and figure that out. And I know my wife has talked about her experiences and having some great leaders that really helped, and how that can make a difference in the culture, and kind of ignite the entire group to really just continue to be excellent in everything that they do. So she'll probably be very happy that I'm reading this book and be grateful that you gave it to me. It's hard to believe we have less than a minute left on the program here. So
Thanks,
you know,
everyone.
yeah, Jen, I really appreciate it. We could talk all day. We have lots of things to talk about. I know you'll be back here at some point, and we want to get you back on and talk about where you're at maybe a year from now and how things look, and drill down some more on how people can use this data and think about this data and connect with people like you in their businesses. Before we leave today, grateful for you. Thank you. Any parting words for us, thoughts, ideas that you'd like to share before leaving the program?
So surround yourself with people who are good at what you're not. And th- work to lift each other up, and work towards a common goal, and you will be surprised how far you can get.
Love that. Good parting words right there. Take that snippet, guys, and just sit on that for a while. Jen, thank you so much. We'll connect with you soon. Appreciate everyone being here today. Patrice, always your assistance. And thanks for checking in, guys. We're going to keep going with this and bring great people aboard for you to connect with. And again, if you're interested in coming on MITC, you'd like to speak, you'd like to share your story, reach out to us. You can connect with Patrice or myself. PATRICE at hkklawoffices.com or KYLE at hkklawoffices.com. We'll get you here. And if you need us to connect you up with Jen, we're happy to do that too.
Thank you,
All right,
everyone.
Jen, thank you so much. We'll see you again. Take care, everyone. Bye.